Welcome to the show, How to Win in Court Without a Liar. I'm Dave Horowitz. I'll be your host. I want to thank everybody for joining me this evening, and it's going to be a great show. I was planning on speaking tonight about authority. Authority is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, I'm a big fan of etymology, and juris, law, and diction, to speak, is law spoken. Authority is author. Ity, I-T-Y. Basically, what that does is it points to the word before it, trying to make it a little bit less abstract. But authority, author, is the root of authority, and it's he who creates something. He who creates something has power over what he creates, has authority. Authority is power or jurisdiction. They're pretty synonymous with each other. Authority is and I say author and ity, I-T-Y, meaning that it's trying to nail down what's abstract. Abstract is basically something that is, not easily visible, or if you're talking about art, it would be a picture that has all kinds of shapes and swirls and lines and things like that. But unless you were the author, you wouldn't be able to recognize it as much, other than lines. And, you can have an opinion on it, but, unless you know exactly what the author was trying to achieve, you have no idea what it is. That's abstract. Just like many of the rules of men are very abstract, and actually have very little authority. Other than that, they write them. Okay, so they write them, so they're in charge of the rules that they write. But they cannot, there is no right to make up a rule for somebody else. We just had somebody come on the line.
Yeah, David, it's Chad Cater in Minnesota.
Hey, Chad. How you doing today?
I'm good. Good.
Thanks for joining me. So today, just talking about authority, what it is, how the courts and government get it, and how it can be transferred, how it, how to keep authority, your own authority when you're going into a courtroom, which is very important. You walk in, they assume that they're in charge because you showed up. Well, we got people coming on the line. There's somebody else join us? Hello? That's all right. So when you go into court, appearing for some sort of summons, you're replying or responding to a court order or a summons to go to court or a ticket. You're going in there, and automatically they assume that, when they call your name and you say, it's me, that you are giving them the authority or assuming authority because you showed up because they asked you to. Or they did ask you. They cannot tell you that it's not a forced thing. If it is a forced thing, then it's void. And most of the time when you go into a court, it's a forced thing because the cop's going to show up if you don't go there, with a gun and his buddies and a warrant, and they're going to show up at your house and they're going to put you in the cage. So it's definitely forced. And Some would say that authority comes by the barrel of a gun. And again, that's power, okay? But it's not legitimate power. It's coerced power. It's not real authority. It's not true authority. And the only one that have authority over us, that has authority over us, would be ourself or our God, whoever that is to you. But another man or woman has no authority over you, no legitimate authority over you. Absolutely, it can be forced upon you, and a lot of the times that's the situation when you go into court. You find yourself in that somebody is forcing their authority on you. And the best way to deal with that is questions. Don't answer, just questions. How hard is it to ask questions? And a question isn't being contemptuous, okay? You're asking questions. You want information. You're trying to figure this out. And usually when you go into court, that's exactly what we're all trying to do, is figure out, one, why we're there and how to get out of there as fast as possible. But when you're asking questions, you have every right to ask questions, as many as you want. And nobody has to put that into a constitution. It just is. So when you go in, don't answer their questions. Ask. Who do you say that? Ask the judge. Who am I to you? Or who do you think you are to me? And they're going to turn around and they're going to make a claim. They're going to tell you, well, I'm your judge. That's a big claim. And once somebody makes that claim, or any claim, they have to prove it. Okay? So you can go into court and question all you want. You don't want to argue. Okay? You don't want to state your own claims, because then you have to prove them. But when you go into that court, if you're asking questions, you can ask questions all day and night. As long as you want to ask questions, you can ask questions. You don't have to answer anything. When you do answer questions, you would be assumed to be giving into their authority, okay? And they'll assume authority over you again, and then it's a push and pull. But if you continue just asking questions, and then ask them to prove their answers, especially if you're asking questions like, who do you think you are to me, to the judge? They turn around and say, well, I'm your judge. Well, that is a claim. They do have to prove that. Force them to prove that. Ask them, hey, you're claiming that you are judge over me. What evidence do you have that gives you the authority to judge me? And you could continue asking these questions all day long. In these courts, administrative courts are business courts. They are courts of business, and they do require contracts. Those contracts do set up the obligation of both parties. But if it's a one-sided contract that they are trying to join you to, okay, and you don't know this, or you may know this, if you've been doing your research and studying, they're trying to get you to join to a contract by the very act of asking for your name. So they say, next case they'll just say a name out, John Doe, and if you answer for John Doe, you're joining yourself to an adhesion contract. You just claim to be the one they're looking for. So you're giving them authority. Even though you didn't realize you're giving them authority, you are. When somebody has authority, it's something they've authored, okay? And in the government, they claim that, the people or the representatives of the people authored these rules that everybody's supposed to live by. And that may be so, okay? But an administration, okay, all businesses, all corporations have administration, okay? You've got the president or the CEO or the CFO, the vice president's galore, all throughout the company. These are all corporate officers, okay? They are bound by their contract, by their employment contract, to do what their employer tells them. So the employer does have authority over them. Well, that's what they're assuming when you come into court. In an administrative court, especially, traffic tickets, which are administrative, pretty much any citation that you would get would be administrative, some administrative agency of the government that the court is hearing the issue on. So when you go in there, it's administrative. They do require a contract. I think I've said it on a couple of shows that, I had a prosecutor say that it was the social contract, okay, that is binding me to the laws. Well, if that's the case, I need to see a copy of it. I need you to prove that this has bound me. It can't just be a blank statement. They have to prove it. You have to require them to prove it. I was listening to George Carlin a little earlier, and basically, and he's right, question everything. Everything. If you don't question it, you're not learning anything, for one, and two, you're not going, if you're being asked the questions and you're answering the questions, you're being interrogated, okay? You're the one supposed to be doing the interrogation here. If you believe that, they brought you in because of something that, you legitimately did, okay, you harmed somebody else, it's up to you before you get there, okay, to handle that responsibly so that it never gets to the court, adjudicate it outside. Last week we were talking about trusts and private trusts, and Robert had mentioned that they had gotten the car back for one of the guys he was helping because they left the courtroom and they administered, they had a meeting outside, a private meeting with the private trust of which the property in question before the court was owned. So the trustee administrated whose vehicle it was and sent the answer to this court, said, hey, this has already been adjudicated, and here's the minutes to prove it. So he basically took the jurisdiction from the court into his private trust. So he very successfully transferred the authority from the public to the private, which is really where you want to stay. So when you go into court, you're dealing in different jurisdictions. A single court could have multiple jurisdictions and does have multiple jurisdictions, or does claim multiple jurisdictions, I should say, because authority, the only legitimate authority, is by the consent of the one, coming under that authority. And in contract law, both parties are under whatever law is cited in the contract. So if it's going to be, we're going to do this by God's law or common law or natural law or, the rules of civil law, criminal law, it really doesn't make a difference, but these are all different types of jurisdictions or authorities that are being claimed. And the only legitimate one is in a valid, legitimate contract where men and women are concerned, okay? Not fictions, but where men and women are concerned, everything is by contract. And actually, in fictions, everything is by paper and contract as well, to think about it. But when you're dealing with fictions, you're dealing with corporations. There has to be a contract between you, the other party, okay, and the one bringing suit. Where's the relationship, okay? So if McDonald's has a complaint, okay, and they say, well, I have a complaint against me, okay, and they try to bring me into court, I go in, I say, well, how are you related to me? How is McDonald's related to me in any way? Did I do something to harm you or your business or anything? They have to have something that ties me in relationship to the party in interest, okay? They can't just say, well, he didn't, he threw his garbage on the floor, okay? And, we had to pay somebody to clean it up. Now they're trying to come after you for a claim. Well, I'm not under their authority that they can require me to pick up anything or dispose of anything in any way, shape, or form. Okay, because it's not even an inferred contract when I walk in the door. The only inferred contract that I have going into McDonald's is that if I order something, I place an order, okay, and they provide what I've ordered from them, it's inferred that I owe the payment for whatever it was that I ordered. That's as far as it goes, okay? So the authority to ask me for the money once they've given me the product, sure, they do have the authority to ask. And that would be a legitimate request that I pay them for the food that I just purchased or ordered. So once I've paid for it, it's mine. Property's changed. End of contract. When you're going into these courts, they always believe they have a contract with you. And a lot of folks, most people out there, do have contracts in these courts, in these administrative courts. They have driver's licenses. They've got registrations or property that's registered. A business license. Could be any number of things that, that are contracts between individuals and the estate or the state. But again, these are all with your legal fiction as you as representative, okay? Not you as the legal fiction or the legal person, okay, because they're not dealing with that. Like I said earlier, author is the one who creates, and they have control over what they create, which means that they have authority. Authority is what they have. So if I create something on my property, or I've built up my property and did things there, and I wanted to invite people over, I can invite people, and I can tell people, no, you can't come here. This is mine. But these contracts that you're under with these people, or what they claim you are under when you go into court, okay, you're going into court, they're claiming that you violated their rules, their administrative codes, okay, and they're not claiming that you did it, they're claiming that your legal person did it, which is a fiction. So how could the fiction possibly have violated anything? It can't do anything on its own, okay? So they have to create joinder in order to get authority, okay? Is there any questions? I know I got a few people on the line here. Does anybody have any questions concerning authority? And
I did, David. When you mentioned like the driver's license contract and all that, so are you saying basically in certain ways, I know the separation of you as compared to the legal fiction, is there a way to not be liable for that contract? Is there any way to do that without getting rid of the driver's license and registration and all that?
Well, when I'm pretty sure you from last week you were on the trust call as well, and when you register something with the public, you are basically entrusting it to the public. You're giving up legal title. Okay, so they do have legal title of your vehicle, of your property, okay, because they have that tag on the back that identifies it as such. It's the state of whatever state you registered in, okay? So you do have a contract there. You're trying, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're trying to say, can you keep the license and the registration and still avoid the tickets or the contract?
Yeah, not
the contract that you have.
Yeah, not so much avoiding the tickets, but separating yourself from that legal fiction, so you're not liable on those tickets.
Again, you can bring in the legal person and turn it over to the the public trustee to administer it. Okay? That's one way to avoid liability. Okay. Or
like
if you are set up privately, you could administer and adjudicate it in the private. Don't even have to go into court, and then just send in your, the minutes of and how the issue was adjudicated privately. And again, I wouldn't have a registration on the vehicle that's owned in private. Okay. You'd have a different type of identifier on there, like this is property of thus and such trust. It doesn't have the state's identifier on there, identifying that it is that state's property. Okay, but as far as license goes, you were never told. You've never had full disclosure of what having a license entails. And if you did, you didn't read the book, because you'd have found out that it wasn't required unless you're driving commercially in their system. Because you can still drive, if you have a Mack truck privately held, okay, the statutes don't apply to the private. They only apply to the public legal fiction side of things. The private side is where you're getting into facts. Okay, and it's a lot easier to prove those in facts than trying to prove that a fiction exists or doesn't. And that's kind of what you would be doing if you went in there with say, hey, I got a license, and this license is the fiction, but it's got a picture of you on it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that license is joinder right there, because it's got an image of you attached to the legal fiction.
Okay.
So they do have joinder. You pull out that ID, a cop pulls you over and you pull out that ID, they go, I got you. We've identified one of ours. And then they think they have a contractual right to do whatever they have to do with their property, and they consider you in that moment as their property. Okay, because only an owner can decide what can be done with the thing that they own. Okay, and if at the very least you should be able to say, hey, you know what, you don't own me, I own myself. Okay, because if they're acting in authority over you, they're actually saying that they created you and that they own you. They have authority over you. They've authored your existence, and now they're going to control it. Okay, you can't say that about yourself as a man or a woman. If you're a woman, they can't say they can't make that claim that they've authored you or have control of what they've created when it is an actual breathing, living thing, which is why I think it's very funny that people go and ask for permission to go hunting and fishing. It gives me an image of, the state's got a little spot down the road there, a little factory where they create all the elk and deer running around and, all these other things that they are licensing. I had a friend of mine actually yesterday said that he's having an issue in town. He lives in town, and they're telling him that they're going to fine him $100 for not licensing his dog. I said, well, I told him, I said, tell him that the dog doesn't need a license. He's not interested in driving. It's that ridiculous that they would think that they have control or authority over, everything out there that they haven't created. And that's the big issue. I mean, that's why else would they create a system of legal fictions, okay, if they already had authority over, you and I. Now, if you hear folks from other countries, especially ones that are under, the Queen of England, okay, Her Majesty the Queen, and God save the Queen, and, the Queen is there under God's authority over, they put her in charge of everybody else, But that's exactly what they're saying, the divine right of kings and queens, which is a crock. She's still got to go to the bathroom. She didn't create you or I, and no more than this government here has. Okay? So in our own authority, we have authority over ourselves, maybe our children, okay? But we don't have authority over our neighbors. None of us have that right. We'd have to create something in order for us to have authority over it. And that is, I got a document back. I'm helping somebody with a credit issue, and the court won't even look at it, okay? They have a document in New York that is a request for judicial intervention, okay? And it's a form that they've authored. They created it. It's as abstract as it gets. There's a dozen boxes and lines and, breaks in this document, and then they have you sign it under penalty of perjury, kind of like a tax return, okay? Now, how could you even know what you're doing if the document itself makes no sense or points to 100 different things, And they could use any of that. They could say, "Oh, you left that blank. You've committed perjury by omission." They could add a check to something, and now you're liable for something that you have nothing to do with. So usually, always, when I'm dealing with the court, I author my own documents. I don't, I'm not using the court's documents or the government's documents on things. Whoever creates the contract is, has authority, has authored the situation that is being contracted. Okay, so when you fill out that application for your license or your registration, the authority is there because they created that in the first place. It's just like an insurance company creating an insurance policy. All it is a document that states what they'll, you pay them and they'll be responsible to pay for this, that, or the other. Okay? But they wrote the document, so they can turn around and deny claims or change the terms, depending on how well you are versed in reading and analyzing contracts to make sure that it's, it's a win-win and not a one-sided contract where, you lose all your authority. Did that help at all there?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. So there's when you're dealing with the court and contracts, I do like to use constructive contracts, especially going into court. Can you have the judge or anybody, hey, do you want a contract? Here's my contract. I'm not interested in your contract. These are the terms of why I'll be here, and try to have fun with it, because usually when somebody hears, this person's in a position of authority, right away they they become fearful, because at that point, they're thinking that somebody has the ability to boss them around, which is basically, the definition of authority. One of the definitions of authority, is the right to order people to do something. And that is not, a position you want to be under. It is not a position you want to be under. You don't want to be under the power or the thumb of anybody else. And this goes across the board with just about any law or type of law out there. Okay? Business law, you're always dealing with contracts. So, you've got a contractor coming in, you subcontract work to him. You have a separate contract for each and every situation. And most people learn the hard way, especially if you're, dealing with relatives or friends. You know, you don't think you need a contract, and next thing you know, you've got no friend, or your family is distant, and you've got issues between the parties, you know, in the relationship that all could have easily been solved by having a simple agreement, you know, and both abiding, you know, agreeing to it, the terms, and abiding by the terms. But when somebody claims to have authority over you, they're claiming that they have a contractual right to have that authority over you. You know, so a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, well, you voted for representatives, so you gave them the authority, you know, win or lose. If it was your, you know, if it was your turd that won, you know, win or lose, you're under the authority of whatever they decide to make up in Congress next week." Okay, because they're your representatives, so they did it on your behalf. Okay, as if you were there yourself. They were your agent. Okay, and that's what they're claiming. I say, show me the contract. You know, anybody who's been on my Facebook page knows I'm not a voter. You know, I don't believe in, you know, in voting. I believe it's an evil practice, a very violent practice. And it's easily assumed that you're giving your rights over to these people that are being voted for, calling themselves your representatives. And they assume that because they had votes, that they automatically have this authority over everybody else. It is an assumption, and it is a fiction, which can be rebutted very easily by asking questions. And when you're in court, or any position where they're asking, you know, where somebody is claiming they have authority over you, question the authority. How did you get this authority? Do we have a contract? Did I give you this authority to, you know, to do this or that? You know, and I guarantee if you're sitting there and you're having this conversation with a cop or a judge or even a politician, you're going to see them get angry, because they've taken over the role of sovereign over you. Okay? They're assuming that they have authority over you, that they're sovereign over you, and they're exercising that sovereign authority, no different than the Queen's imagined authority from God to rule over everybody else, you know, at her disposal. Okay? And that's exactly what the judge is acting like. That is exactly what the cop is acting like on the side of the road there. But don't be afraid to ask them, because it's going to come back. They're going to, you know, as long as you keep asking them the questions, you know, where did you get that authority from over me? Oh, well, you know, the city council. I'm a city police officer, so the city council gave me my authority. Well, who is this? You know, who is the city council to me? You know, that's a tougher question to ask. But it's a much tougher question to answer for them, especially a cop, because they're not usually very well versed in law or logic, for that matter. So when you're asking them these questions, they'll tend to get angrier faster than a judge, who most of the time knows what you're trying to do. Okay, at this point. You know, they have classes that teach them how to deal with people who claim that, you know, there's no authority, they have no authority over them. Okay, and they'll use little tricks and inferences and assumptions to get over not having authority over you. When you go into these administrative courts, that's why I said earlier, if you go into their court, you hand over the legal person, the fiction. Here, do what you want with it. Doesn't matter to you. You could still walk out. You're not joined to it at that point. You could walk out, or you could sit and watch, but you're not joined to that legal fiction at that point, and you've created a trustee relationship, which transfers the authority to administrate that estate to the judge as trustee. Okay, so his only authority, or her only authority at that point, is to rule in favor of, you know, beneficial to the trust and to the beneficiaries of that trust, because that's the oath that they have to take. Okay, that's where you leave it at that point. You know, why fight over licenses? Why argue at all? You know, are you a public trustee? Yes. Well, here's the public trust that I'd like for you to administer. I only have a beneficial interest, but I am not the legal person. Administer away. I'll sit and watch. You know, I'm not arguing. You know, knock yourself out. Now, if they ask me a question, I'll answer with another question. You know, but I'm not going to answer their questions because it's an attempt to take back authority over me. Okay? So if you're arguing over licenses, you're arguing over something that they own, that they created and that they authored, something that they have authority over. They do. You just signed on to it. And that could have been, you know, again, because you weren't fully aware of what you were signing on for. You know, there wasn't full disclosure in the terms of the agreement that you signed on for. But you were told from birth, basically, that you had to have one. Okay? So most people assume that they have to have one, which makes their job in the court much, much easier. Okay? It wouldn't work otherwise. Otherwise, everybody'd walk in and hand them the legal person and walk out. Have a nice day. Good luck getting anything from it. You know? And unfortunately, they've already been paid. You know? If you go back to 1913, 1933, and the raw deal, they took all the gold and silver, and everything left is lies and fiat, fiction. There's no actual value there. Okay? And, you know, it's still dealing in the world of fictions. You want to make sure that they have a contract to deal with you, not the legal person, but you. And you can do that, you know, with or without a license. You know, so long as you don't pull that license out in the middle of the court. You could argue that, but why argue? You know, I mean, you're trying to win. You're not trying to argue. You're not trying to win an argument. You know, my father was a gambler, and he says, if you don't have anything in the pot, you win. You know, that means you've got nothing to lose. So you actually won. You've saved yourself time, money, aggravation, you know, stress, threats, all these different things of having to deal with it when you, you know, discourage the fiction from joining you to it. Okay? I'm going to take a couple minutes break here, and I will be back. Please hang on the line, and if you have any questions, I'll take those questions when I get back. Thanks for being on the show. And again, if the show is a help to you and if the information is a help to you, if you need more help, feel free to contact me by email or a private message, and I will get back to you quickly, and hopefully I can help you with whatever you're having problems with. Again, hold on for a couple minutes, and I'll be back with the show. You're listening to How to Win in Court Without a Liar.